At the family reunion, in front of 78 people, my daughter raised a glass and said, "Cheers to all the men here except the one who thinks he is truly my dad." Everyone laughed over it, but I decided to probe further. What I discovered was terrifying. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Joe Kennedy from Florida. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. The reunion was my idea, like it always was. I had rented the lodge upstate, booked a caterer for the ones who didn't like barbecue, and even arranged a little karaoke setup for after dinner, because my niece Jenna insisted on butchering Rolling in the Deep every year like it was a family tradition. I'd done all the work, sent out the group text, covered the hotel rooms for the out-of-towners, made sure my elderly aunt had her walker-friendly room on the first floor. That's the kind of man am, I suppose. The one who holds everything together, quietly, without complaint. So when I saw my daughter, standing at the makeshift podium we'd rigged up from a repurposed bar stool and a microphone stand, I expected something heartfelt. She had on that wine-colored dress I bought her last Christmas, her curls pinned back, eyes sparkling in the dim glow of string lights. I thought, this is the kind of moment a father dreams about. She cleared her throat, raised her glass, and gave everyone that disarming smile she'd inherited from her mother. "I just want to say how grateful I am for all the strong, supportive, amazing men in my life," she began. People started clapping already. Her voice carried well. Years of theater camp paid off, I thought. So here's to my uncles, my cousins, my mentors, to all the men who've shown me what integrity looks like. She paused for dramatic effect. Her eyes flicked toward me. "Except the one who still thinks he's truly my dad." And then she clinked her glass with a smirk that sliced through me like a blade. Laughter broke out around the patio. Real laughter. People howled. My brother leaned over to slap his knee. Someone even whistled. And I stood there, beer in hand, smiling like a damn idiot, pretending it didn't feel like someone had punched a hole through my ribcage. Afterward, when the music came back on and the crowd shifted toward the dance floor, I stayed rooted near the back, pretending to fuss with the Bluetooth speaker. I could still hear the echo of her voice in my head, twisted and sharp, the one who still thinks he's truly my dad. I couldn't let it go. Not because I thought she meant it seriously. God, I prayed she didn't. But because something in the way she said it didn't feel like a joke. It felt rehearsed, polished, premeditated. And the laugh she gave after? It wasn't nervous or apologetic. It was triumphant. The next morning, I couldn't stop myself. I brought it up while we were loading leftovers into Tupperware in the lodge kitchen. "What was that toast about last night?" I asked her, trying to keep my voice light. "You called me your supposed dad." She didn't even look up. "It was a joke, Dad." Everyone laughed. "Don't be so sensitive." "No, it wasn't," I replied, sharper than I meant. "It was weird. It didn't sound like a joke." She shrugged. "Maybe you just didn't get it." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just the brush off. And that stuck with me. Later that week, I ordered a DNA test. Just a curiosity thing, I told myself. Something to get closure. Maybe even something to laugh about down the line. But the packaging felt too clinical when it arrived. The swabs too sterile. I stared at it on the kitchen table for 3 days before finally taking the test and sending it off. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't want to admit I was paranoid, that I was letting a dumb joke mess with my head. But something had been off for a while now, little things I had ignored. The late-night phone calls she used to take outside when our daughter was a baby. The way she flinched the first time our daughter was born, and the nurse said she had her daddy's nose. 2 weeks later, the results arrived. I sat in my truck in the driveway, hands trembling as I opened the email. The words burned into my retinas. Probability of paternity, 0%. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, reading it over and over until the screen went dark. I took the printed results to her, to my wife. She was folding laundry in our bedroom, humming. I didn't even speak, just handed her the paper. She looked confused at first, like maybe it was a bill. But then her face drained. "What is this?" she asked. "You tell me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. This has to be a mistake. I didn't speak. She blinked, swallowed. It was a one-time thing. I was young. We were rocky back then. You had just lost your job, and you lied to me for 30 years, I said. My voice cracked. You let me raise her thinking she was mine. You looked me in the eye every day and let me believe she is yours, she snapped. You raised her. You love her. Biology doesn't change that. I laughed. A short, bitter sound. Doesn't it? Because it sure as hell changed everything for me. She reached for me. I stepped back. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. But the worst came after. Not the lie. Not even the marriage. It was my daughter. When I told her, when I sat her down and explained everything, she didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She didn't seem shocked. She knew. And all she said was, "So you're just going to stop being my dad? After everything?" I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You stopped being my daughter the moment you stood in front of 78 people and made a mockery of me." She called me heartless, inconsiderate, said I was overreacting. But I didn't flinch. Because for the first time in decades, I knew exactly what I was reacting to. I used to believe that the worst kind of betrayal was the one that came with screaming matches, slammed doors, and shattered dishes. You know, the kind you see in movies. But it turns out, the most dangerous betrayal isn't loud. It's slow, silent. It creeps into your bed at night and kisses you on the cheek. It makes your coffee just how you like it. It sends you anniversary cards signed with love. That's the kind of betrayal I lived with for 30 years. The kind that made me question every memory I had. I sat in my living room for hours after filing the divorce paperwork, staring at photo albums and school portraits and handmade Father's Day cards that suddenly felt like props in a show I didn't know I was starring in. I had built a life around a lie. And the more I looked, the clearer it became that my wife, my ex-wife now, wasn't sorry about what she'd done. She was sorry she got caught. The hardest part wasn't the lie. It was the performance. Every time she said things like, "She gets that stubbornness from you," or "You're her hero," it was just another stitch in the costume she made me wear. And I wore it proudly. I paid for her braces, taught her how to ride a bike, held her through breakups, and stayed up until 3 a.m. waiting for her to sneak in from high school parties. I was there. I showed up. I gave her my whole damn self. And still, she stood at that reunion and humiliated me like I was a joke. Like I was just some guy playing house. After I moved out, I needed answers. Not just about the betrayal, but about the man who was her biological father. I didn't want to know him. I didn't care who he was, what he did, or if he was even still alive. But I needed to know if he knew. Did he walk away? Or was he pushed out of the picture? Did he even want a child? Or was he just a warm body in a moment of weakness? I asked my ex. She refused to say. Claimed it didn't matter. Said it was ancient history. "You're missing the point," she said during one of our last phone calls. "You're still her father." "No," I said flatly. "I was her father. Past tense. Let's not rewrite definitions to soothe your conscience." She cried, of course. Tried to turn the tables. Said I was cruel. That I was punishing an innocent girl. But that's the thing about innocence. It's easy to claim when you're on the receiving end. I would have walked through fire for that girl. But when she stood up and made me the butt of a punchline, she made her choice. That wasn't a slip of the tongue or a misunderstood joke. That was a message. One I heard loud and clear. About a week after moving into the small rental I found off Route 9, I got a voicemail from my daughter. I hadn't blocked her yet. Part of me still hoped she might see the gravity of what had happened. That maybe she'd call crying, apologizing, saying she was just hurt and confused. Instead, she left a message that opened with, "Wow, you really meant it, huh?" She went on to say she thought I was stronger than this. That family wasn't about blood. That I was acting like a child. "You raised me. I didn't ask for any of this," she said. "But you're just going to toss me aside like I'm nothing?" I listened to that voicemail 5 times. Not once did she say she was sorry. Not once did she acknowledge what she'd done. She was angry, not at the situation, but at me. For not swallowing my pride. For not playing along. For refusing to keep dancing to the music after someone yanked the rug out from under me. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in one hand, and a framed photo of her graduation day in the other. I looked at the way she leaned into me in that picture, how her smile beamed under her cap, how my hand was proudly gripping her shoulder. I remembered how she cried when I surprised her with a car that day. I remembered thinking, this is what fatherhood is all about. And then I remembered that toast, that smug look on her face, that glint in her eye when she twisted the knife. And just like that, the frame slipped from my fingers and cracked against the hardwood floor. I didn't pick it up. The next morning, I blocked her number. People always talk about forgiveness like it's the righteous path. Like choosing peace means choosing people who have harmed you. But no one talks about how heavy it is to carry betrayal in your chest every day. How exhausting it is to fake normalcy for the sake of others. I didn't want to be that man anymore. I didn't want to look at her and wonder if she saw me as her father or as a convenient wallet with a last name. I didn't want to smile through pain or hug through resentment. I wanted peace, even if it meant solitude. I started telling people the truth when they asked. No more sugarcoating. When my brother texted, "Why aren't you at Mom's Sunday dinner?" I replied, "Because I found out the child I raised isn't mine, and I'm not pretending everything's okay just to make everyone else comfortable." He didn't reply, but my cousin Leah did. She called the next day, voice shaking, and said, "I'm sorry. That toast, it didn't sit right with me either. I just didn't know what was going on." She listened, really listened. She told me I wasn't crazy. That sometimes walking away is the only way to stop the bleeding. It was the first time I didn't feel insane, or cruel, or like I was overreacting. I wasn't. I was just finally reacting. What would you have done if you found out your child wasn't really yours, after decades of love, sacrifice, and loyalty? Was it wrong to walk away? Or was it the only honest choice left? Let me know your thoughts below. Your story might help someone facing the same impossible truth. The day the divorce papers were finalized, it rained like hell. The kind of sideways rain that hit your face no matter which way you turned. I didn't take an umbrella. I wanted to feel it. I wanted it to soak into my jacket, cling to my shirt, chill me straight to the bone, because at least that kind of pain was honest. At least that didn't lie to my face while swearing it loved me. The courthouse parking lot was almost empty when I arrived. Just a few other souls bracing against the wind, clutching manila envelopes and heartbreak. I sat in my car a few minutes longer than I needed to, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since the test results. But my chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything that used to make me whole and replaced it with questions I'd never get answers to. The courtroom was small and cold, with flickering fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and tired. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Angela who had seen more broken marriages than a bartender in Vegas, leaned over and whispered, "She's going to contest the financials. Just be ready." I nodded, barely listening. Across the aisle, my wife, no, ex-wife, sat with her lips pressed into a thin line, arms crossed like a defiant teenager. She wouldn't look at me. Fine. I had nothing left to give her anyway. When the judge asked the usual questions, irreconcilable differences, property division, custody, though we had none to fight over, I answered clearly, calmly, as if I were reading from a grocery list. Because in a way I was. Just ticking off items, each one another part of the life I'd built being sorted, priced, and divided. When it was over, she followed me out into the hall, called my name like it still meant something. "Don't you think you're being a little extreme?" she asked, voice sharp but not quite angry. She was trying to sound reasonable now, like this was a misunderstanding, not a gut-wrenching betrayal. I turned slowly, looked her dead in the eye. "You lied to me for 30 years. Then you lied again. You let me become a father to someone else's child and never once gave me the truth. I don't care if you think it's extreme. I think it's overdue." She shook her head. "You're punishing her, too." She didn't ask for any of this. She didn't have to ask, I snapped. She stood in front of the entire family and humiliated me. That was her choice. Just like keeping the truth was yours. "She's still your daughter," she whispered, pleading now. "No," I said, voice quiet but firm. "She was, but not anymore." That conversation haunted me more than I expected. Not because I doubted what I said, but because it confirmed something deep inside me. There was no going back. Some bridges aren't just burned, they collapse under the weight of truth. I drove home in the rain, watched the wipers struggle to keep up with the storm, and thought about every Christmas morning, every recital, every scraped knee I had kissed. I thought about how love could be so freely given, and yet still taken for granted. I had poured everything I had into that family, and now I was driving alone, in a beat-up truck filled with legal documents and soaked through regret. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my oldest friend, Marcus. We'd lost touch a bit over the years, mostly because I'd been so caught up in being a provider, a husband, a dad. He answered on the third ring, sounded surprised, but genuinely glad to hear from me. I told him everything. No sugarcoating, just the raw, jagged truth. There was a long pause when I finished, and then he said, "Jesus, I always knew something was off about her. You sure you're okay?" "No," I admitted, "but I will be." He came over the next night with beer and a deck of cards. We didn't talk about the divorce much, just played spades, grilled burgers in the rain, and let the silence between us fill with something that felt close to peace. Sometimes, all you need is someone who remembers who you were before everything went sideways. But peace didn't last long. 2 weeks after the papers were signed, I started getting messages from extended family. My cousin Robbie texted me, "Heard you disowned your daughter. That true, or just family gossip?" Family gossip. As if my pain was just a juicy headline in some twisted group chat. I ignored it. But then came the message from my own mother. She hadn't said much since the reunion, just a vague, "Hope you and Karen work things out." Now she was texting full paragraphs. "She's your daughter in every way that counts," she wrote. "You're being cruel. She needs you." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote back. Where was all this concern when she was standing on stage mocking me in front of everyone? She left me on read. The narrative had shifted. I was no longer the betrayed husband. I was the cold-hearted father who gave up on his child. People didn't want the truth. They wanted comfort. And it was more comforting to believe I'd lost my mind than to accept that the woman they knew as Sweet Karen had deceived me for decades. It was easier to paint me as bitter than to confront the possibility that love, deep, sacrificial, unconditional love, could be so easily manipulated. That realization hardened something in me. I stopped returning calls, stopped explaining myself. I didn't know them clarity. I had already lost everything that mattered. The only thing left was my dignity, and I planned to protect it like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. It was a Sunday afternoon when I made the final decision. The sky was that dull gray that made everything feel stuck between seasons, and I was sitting on the porch of my rental with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold in my hands. I had been thinking, no, obsessing, for days over what I would say, over whether there was still a version of this story that didn't end in total silence between me and the girl I had once called my daughter. But the more I turned it over in my mind, the more I realized that the silence had already started the day she picked performance over love. That toast wasn't just a joke. It was a declaration. It told me everything I needed to know about how she saw me, not as a father, but as a placeholder, a man filling a role. And when I finally opened my laptop and typed the words, "I'm done," into a message meant for her, I felt no tremble in my fingers, no regret. Just a clean kind of stillness I hadn't known in months. I didn't send it right away. I stared at the screen for a long time. My phone buzzed twice while I sat there. One text from my sister asking if I was still being dramatic, and another from Karen, just a picture of a family gathering I hadn't been invited to. My daughter was in the middle of it, holding a sparkler, smiling like nothing was broken, like the man who raised her didn't exist anymore. And maybe, to her, I didn't. That photo made it easier. I clicked send. Her response came an hour later. Just 5 words. "You really mean it, huh?" I didn't reply. I didn't know her anything more. 3 days later, she showed up at my door. I heard the knock while washing dishes and nearly didn't answer. But something told me this needed to happen in person. I opened the door and found her standing there in a hoodie and jeans, arms crossed, eyes red but dry. She looked smaller than I remembered, like someone had deflated all the certainty out of her. "I just wanted to talk," she said, face to face. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She paced the living room like it was a courtroom, pausing near the shelf where I'd placed what few framed photos I hadn't thrown out. She picked up one of us fishing from a trip we took when she was 12. We'd laughed so hard that day when she fell in the water trying to unhook a bass. "You really threw all of this away?" she asked, her voice low, wounded. I stayed quiet for a beat. "Then, I didn't throw anything away. I was lied to. And then I was mocked for believing the lie." She turned, anger creeping into her face. "I didn't mock you. You made a speech," I snapped. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I love." "I was angry," she shouted. "I just found out a week before the reunion that you weren't my biological father. Mom finally told me." I didn't know how to process it. "You processed it by making a joke of me," I said, voice flat. "I didn't know how else to deal with it," she said, voice cracking. I was confused. Hurt. "You're the only father I've ever known," and suddenly, "No," I interrupted. "Don't do that. Don't pull the 'you're the only dad I've ever known' line after you burned me in front of our whole family." She looked stunned for a second, then whispered, "So that's it?" I nodded. "That's it." She dropped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I stood there, watching the back of the girl I used to protect like my life depended on it, and I didn't feel hate. I didn't even feel rage. I just felt empty, like I'd already grieved this version of her, and now I was just waiting for the room to catch up with me. After a while, she stood up and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. "Just so you know," she said, "I did love you." I nodded. "Then you should have treated me like it." And then she was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't pour a drink or call anyone to vent. I just stood in that room for a long time, letting the silence stretch. I thought back to all those nights I rocked her to sleep, carried her in my arms when she had nightmares, paid for braces, cars, classes, clothes. I remembered the way she clung to me when she got accepted to college. I remembered the speech I gave at her graduation, the speech she had asked for. "No one has ever had my back the way my dad does," she said that night. But she didn't mean me. Not really. Or maybe she did then, but it didn't last. The fallout came fast after that. My cousin unfollowed me on Facebook. A few family members blocked my number. One of my nieces posted a cryptic status about people who abandon their kids and call it self-care. And honestly, I didn't care. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't bleeding out trying to be understood. I didn't have to keep explaining a pain no one wanted to believe was real. I just existed. Quietly. Without pretense. Without lies. Marcus called a few nights later and asked if I wanted to join him on a weekend fishing trip. I said yes. Not because I wanted to fish, but because I wanted to be around someone who didn't need a family tree to validate my value. Someone who didn't treat betrayal like a footnote. Someone who knew the difference between a father and a man who was just used until the truth no longer needed hiding. The thing about silence is that it doesn't stay quiet forever. It becomes something else. It becomes memory. And memory, especially the kind born from betrayal, doesn't fade like people promise it will. It calcifies. It hardens into a dull ache in your bones, a whisper in the back of your mind that surfaces at the worst possible times. Like when I passed a father teaching his little girl how to ride a bike in the park one Saturday morning. She had pigtails and skinned knees and kept shouting, "Don't let go." And he laughed and said, "I won't, baby. I got you." I had to sit down, right there on a bench. My chest hurt like someone had pressed a fist against it. I didn't know if I was mourning who she was, or who I had been. Maybe both. Life didn't fall apart exactly. It just dulled. Work became routine. Evenings were quiet. I stopped checking social media altogether because every scroll felt like a knife. Family birthdays I wasn't invited to, cousins posing with my daughter like nothing had changed, Karen smiling in group photos with her arm around my mother. It was like they'd all decided the easiest way to fix the fracture was to pretend I never existed. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the only thing more painful than betrayal was being erased afterward. But not everyone vanished. One day, out of the blue, I got a knock on my door. It was Leah, my cousin on my father's side. We hadn't been particularly close growing up, but she'd always been one of the few in the family with a quiet kind of integrity. She stood on my porch with a covered dish in her hands and a look in her eyes that told me this wasn't just a courtesy call. "Chicken and dumplings," she said, holding it out. "I figured you weren't cooking for yourself these days." I opened the door and let her in. No small talk, just gratitude. We sat at my tiny dining table, steam rising between us. She waited until I'd taken the first bite before speaking. "They've made you out to be the villain," she said. "But I know better." I didn't answer. I just kept chewing, staring at the wood grain in the table like it held some kind of answer. "I was there, you know," she continued. "At the reunion. I saw your face when she said it. And I saw how everyone laughed. It didn't sit right with me." "That makes two of us," I murmured. "She knew," Leah said. "She knew you weren't her biological father before that night. Karen told her a week earlier. I heard it from Jenna. That admission hit me harder than I expected. I had guessed, but hearing it confirmed, it hollowed me out in a new way. So the toast wasn't just cruel," I said slowly. "It was calculated." Leah nodded. "I think she was trying to reclaim something. But she did it at your expense. And nobody had the guts to say anything. Not even you." She looked ashamed, and I appreciated the honesty. "No." I froze. "But I'm saying it now." And that mattered, more than I thought it would. Because in a world where everyone had picked sides before understanding the story, Leah's voice felt like a lifeline. Not absolution, but recognition. We talked for hours. About family. About the pressure to forgive. About the fantasy of unconditional love and how dangerous it becomes when weaponized. Before she left, she said something I'll never forget. "You're not heartless. You're just tired of bleeding for people who keep handing you knives." After she left, I started letting myself feel again. Not just the pain, but the relief, too. The relief of no longer performing. Of not tiptoeing around fragile egos or pretending I wasn't shattered inside. I started writing things down. Not because I planned to share them, but because I needed to see my truth on paper. I filled 3 notebooks in a month. Pages and pages of grief, confusion, anger, and finally, clarity. One night, I got a call from a blocked number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail that followed, that one I listened to. It was Karen. Her voice was low, tired. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry," she said. "Not for what happened 30 years ago, but for how I handled it now. I was scared and selfish, and I didn't want to be the villain, so I made you one." There was a pause. Then she added, "You were a good father. I should have honored that." I didn't delete the message, but I didn't call her back, either. Some things deserve to be heard, not responded to. Her apology wasn't for reconciliation, it was her confession. And while I appreciated the honesty, it didn't change the facts. Because being sorry after the damage doesn't erase the choices that caused it. And yet, that message cracked something in me. Not open. Not enough to let her back in. But enough to remind me that people are rarely all one thing. Karen had lied. Betrayed. Let me take on a life that wasn't mine to bear. But she was also the woman who held my hand when my father died. Who made soup when I was sick. Who believed in my business when it was just a half-baked idea on a napkin. It didn't excuse her. But it did humanize her. And that's where I landed, eventually. Not in forgiveness, but in understanding. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't come knocking with a bouquet of apologies or the satisfying thunder of revenge. No, peace slips in quietly, like a tired guest who knows the house has been through enough already. It showed up for me on an ordinary Thursday, months after the final blow had landed. When I found myself standing in the kitchen making dinner and suddenly realized I wasn't waiting for anyone. Not for a call. Not for a reconciliation. Not for an explanation. I stirred the pot on the stove, the radio humming low in the background, and I just breathed. The kind of breath that isn't stolen by tension or laced with anger. Just breath. Full and honest. And I realized in that moment that I had survived something I wasn't sure I would. The aftermath hadn't been clean. The gossip didn't stop. Karen's apology, though heartfelt, sparked a fresh wave of back-channel whispers. Some said I was bitter. Others said I was brave. But the loudest voices were the ones I never heard directly, the ones who deleted me from their family albums and text chains. I was fine with that, truly, because after all the noise, I'd found something better than vindication, clarity. I didn't need a chorus of validation to know I had done the right thing. I just needed my own reflection not to flinch when I looked in the mirror. Still, there were moments, flashes, really, where the ghost of what once was would visit. Like when I saw a little girl skipping down the grocery store aisle calling for her dad. or when I found one of my old button-downs tucked into a drawer with a sticky note that read, "Don't wear this to the interview. It's cursed. Love, your favorite daughter." I sat down on the edge of my bed that day and just stared at that note. The handwriting so familiar it made my throat close. And for a moment, I grieved, not for her, but for the version of her I once knew, the version I believed in. I folded the note carefully and slid it into a box of keepsakes I couldn't quite part with. Not because I wanted to return to that life, but because pretending it never existed would be another lie. And I was done with lies. A few weeks later, I got an invitation in the mail. It was addressed in her handwriting. The envelope held a cream-colored card with embossed lettering. "Please join us for a celebration, my engagement party." Her name was there, along with a man I had never heard of. No dad, no love, just my name and an RSVP line. I stared at it for a long time, thought about what it meant. Was it an olive branch? A trap? A test to see if I was still susceptible to guilt? I almost didn't go, but then I remembered what Leah had said. "You're not heartless. You're just tired of bleeding." So I went. Not for her. Not for Karen. For me. To prove that peace didn't mean isolation. That I could show up without giving myself away again. The event was held in a fancy little winery just outside town. Soft jazz played in the background. Everyone was dressed like they were auditioning for a lifestyle magazine. I walked in alone, wearing a simple navy suit, and I watched as heads turned. Whispers traveled like static across the room. Some people nodded. Some avoided eye contact. And then I saw her. She stood near the bar, holding a glass of champagne, radiant and poised. When her eyes met mine, something flickered across her face. Not fear, not anger, but something close to recognition. She walked over, cautiously. "You came," she said. I nodded. "I came to say goodbye." She blinked. "Goodbye? I won't be at the wedding," I said plainly. "And I won't pretend to be something I'm not anymore. But I wanted to wish you well. Because despite everything, I do want you to be happy." Her eyes glistened. "You're still my dad, you know." I gave her a sad smile. "No, I was your father, and I did it well. But now I'm just a man you used to know." And then I turned, walked out, and never looked back. That night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey and listened to the crickets. No phone in hand. No lingering pain. Just peace. Not the kind they sell in therapy ads or self-help books. The kind you earn after you finally put down the weight you were never meant to carry. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. Walking away, cutting ties, letting go. And I tell them this. I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret standing up for my truth. I regret that it had to happen at all. But I don't live in regret. I live in reality. A reality where I chose my dignity over delusion. My truth over their comfort. And peace. Real, unfiltered peace over pretense. Sometimes peace means closing the door without slamming it. Sometimes it means choosing silence over another round of betrayal. If you've ever walked away to save yourself, I want to hear from you. Drop your story below. Because somewhere, someone else is trying to make the same choice, and your truth might just light their path. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever had to walk away from people you once would have died for, share your thoughts in the comments. Was I wrong for setting boundaries, or was I finally choosing myself after a lifetime of lies? Your voice matters here. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories about truth, betrayal, and the cost of finally saying, enough. See you soon in the next story.